Hello, Americans. I'm Kenton McConnell. It's Constitution time. Today is Friday, January 22nd, 2021. For the first time, our live stream is coming to you in 4K, which means two things. Number one, I hope it's coming to you. Number two, the resolutions have been much higher. I'll be looking forward to any feedback that you'd like to give. This was a momentous week, of course. We had the swearing in of a new president, his first few days in office, and many other events. I'm most grateful for what didn't happen in the last week since we last spoke. There were a lot of fears, and fears make possibilities seem even worse than they actually are. I'm gratified that there was no violence. There was no part two of January 6th, at least not yet. And the former president is on his way, and the new president is already conducting business. For that brief shining moment, that one day, there was a let-up in the partisanship and the rhetoric. And for that brief moment, there was at least some sense that things could be different. And perhaps they will be different. But it really didn't take that long for the honeymoon to start being over and for the usual shenanigans to set back in. I've spoken before about the reason that I started doing Constitution Time, the threat that I perceive to our democracy. And while the immediacy may not be there, because Joe Biden won the presidency and won through all of the untruths that were told about the election and the violence of January 6th, there are still a lot of threats that remain, that we the people really have to roll up our sleeves and address. Ultimate partisanship is already raising its head again in some really amazing ways. I'll talk about just a few that I took pretty significant note of. One is that, as expected on day one, the new president began with a series of executive orders. Some of them were new in nature, designed around COVID and other key things that need to be done and need to be done quickly. The president used his authority to start making that happen. But many of them were reversals of previous executive orders by the previous executive, which is the same thing that the previous executive did to the previous executive before him. And this is something that we talked about, this back and forth, this seesaw, because executive orders are not the way things are supposed to be done. They're supposed to be done through the legislative process. But the legislative process is almost hopelessly mired and stymied by the ultimate partisanship and the games that happen in Washington. What I was amazed by was not the fact that the new president created these executive orders and started reversing his predecessor, but the folks on, what I was amazed at was that the folks on the other side of the aisle started talking about the hypocrisy of President Biden talking about unity when he immediately was going to start reversing with executive orders. So I guess the idea there is that what President Trump did in days and weeks and months, President Biden was supposed to somehow try to slug through, probably for the entire time of his presidency, to reverse. And of course, that's not the way it's going to happen. While we are doing what should be done through legislation, by the fiat of executive order, this is exactly the way it's going to be, with Americans caught in the middle. First, we're like fifth graders playing soccer, bunched up like grapes, running back and forth every 4 to 8 years, reversing the direction and spending half the time to reverse the direction that we were on. I think that one of the enhancements that we need for the Constitution is to get rid of this process. And that will take a lot. You can tell something is a bad idea when it ends up like this. Presidents reversing each other with half of their term. Because our founders were thinkers. They would have thought of this consequence and would not have created the Constitution to allow rule by executive order. They did not want the president to be a king in any sense. And they especially did not want the president to use such devices to spend the money, as President Trump did with an executive order when he redirected funds earmarked for defense for his wall. It is definitely my hope that somehow during his term, President Biden will figure out a way, or that we'll amend the Constitution so that this can no longer be done. Another thing that I am very, very surprised by, when Mitch McConnell was in the majority of the Senate, you couldn't get around him. He was in charge. You couldn't get anything done because he was in the way. Now that he's the minority leader rather than the majority leader, we still can't get anything done because Mitch McConnell is somehow still in the way. And I cannot help but feel that the Democratic leadership is missing the boat somewhere. How can he still be the most powerful person in the Senate, the most visible person in the Senate, when he's not even the majority leader anymore? The reporting today is that Mitch McConnell will not come to agreement with Chuck Schumer over the rules of the Senate, how the Senate will be run in the next 2 or 4 years. They can't agree on the rules. He refuses to agree on the rules. And the disagreement is around the very controversial filibuster rule. Well, it turns out that if they can't come to agreement on the rules, that the rules of the previous session will continue to apply, including the chairmanships of the committees. In other words, even though the Democrats are the majority party, the Republicans will continue to run all the committees that they ran before, which was all the committees. When I hear about rules like this, it really makes me understand that the Senate has things set up so that they're kind of a second presidency. They have more power than the executive branch. They can hold anything up. No legislation goes through if the quote-unquote majority leader does not want it to even be debated on the Senate floor. And then they have games like this where our entire government can be held up. Right now, they have critical things to do. They've got to, accept or reject nominees to cabinet positions and other important positions from the new president. They've got legislation that needs to be put through for COVID and other things. And somewhere along the line, they've got an impeachment to run. But they can't even agree on the rules of the road. Now, some expect that this will be worked out in a few days. But I'm absolutely astonished that Mitch McConnell, merely by failing to come to agreement with his nemesis, Chuck Schumer, could continue to have that amount of power. All he has to do is not come to agreement. I have to admit, Mitch has been going back and forth on my Mitchometer in the last few weeks because I was very happy that he came out and made a strong statement against the president in the light of January 6th and has been open to impeachment, possibly open to conviction. But he's not letting go of much of his power. And I honestly think that the Democratic leadership in the Senate is outmatched when it comes to the chess match that takes place. So what has to change here? Well, I've mentioned some of these things before. And interestingly, just before I came down to do the live stream, they were talking about Kamala Harris may have to preside over the impeachment trial because the letter of the law in the Constitution is that the Supreme Court, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court will preside over the impeachment of a sitting president. Well, Donald Trump is not a sitting president. So the Chief Justice may have the option and may decline to preside over that procedure. And that would leave Kamala Harris in that role as the president of the Senate. And I believe that the Biden administration should exert the authority of the vice president as the president of the Senate. Now, to be honest, this would be more effective if Mitch McConnell were still the majority leader. But regardless, it seems to me like we need some extra firepower in the Senate. When I say we, I mean we the American people. And having Kamala Harris in the role of president of the Senate would potentially exert that additional power. I also believe that the power of oversight must be brought to bear because that road does travel both ways. The Congress has oversight over the administrative, but the administrative could exert oversight over the Congress as well. And if the Senate continues to push forward these rules that they have, nuclear options, and they don't have to agree on the rules of the road, and Mitch McConnell can still keep all the chairmanships, these ridiculous rules that cost us weeks and months, and strip the majority of their power, I think the president should step in with executive orders to change that. Probably never been tried before, but the previous president did a lot of things that had never been tried with executive orders. And something's got to be done. We don't need a second president in the Senate. What we need is to get things done. And sometimes it seems our government is designed to do the opposite. However wonderful the Constitution is, the bureaucracy does not always seem designed to get things done, and we badly need to get things done. To resume our place in the world order, to move ourselves forward, to get our infrastructure rebuilt, and to work on Joe Biden's legislative and social agenda, to move ourselves forward in the many ways that we need to move forward. I have strong hopes that Mr. Biden will be successful in creating a higher degree of unity. We could hardly have a lower degree of unity than we have had for the last 4 years. So it's not a very high bar to say, Mr. Biden, please, yes, bring us back together. And I truly hope that ultimate partisanship will not keep us apart for another 4 years. Because I think we're at a point where we can't afford that anymore. We can't afford to be apart. We have to be together. We have to find a way. I work with a small group of like-minded folk, like-minded in that we want to find a way to get us back together. And our first job is to seek to understand, why are we apart? And I'll probably start to talk about some of our initiatives and some of our thinking in this group on Constitution time, just because we really do have to find a way to cut through the differences, which I believe sometimes are just nothing but hype. Something that happened in the media and got passed along to us. We need to find a way to be far more together as countrymen, as Americans, as citizens of the world. And I know that we can do that. One thing I continue to feel is the absence of a thing. The absence of the daily browbeating pressure that came from the President of the United States, constantly sending out a wave of division and hate via Twitter that was amplified 1,000,000 times a day by every media outlet. I do not miss that. One of the biggest questions that I have and wish to address is it over? Or was a blueprint created that others are chomping at the bit to follow in 2 years or 4 years? To follow in the footsteps of Donald Trump in the path away from democracy. Our common sense as Americans in many ways won the day this last week and November 3rd. But it was close. It was too close. And we can't always count on that happening again. And we've got to find a way to give ourselves an insurance policy that it can't happen here. Cannot happen here again. And not just building up security around the Capitol. I'm talking about building up security around our democracy, around the United States of America itself. Security from insurrection, from inside. I know that we can do that. Thank you for joining me. I am hopeful that the 4K worked out and that you noticed a difference. Be safe, Americans, until you get vaccinated and after. Steer clear of COVID. It's still worse than ever. So please take care of yourselves. We'll see you next time on Constitution Time.